As we established in part 1, yes, this is part 2, and there is a part 1, link in the description, doing enough damage per second is the single most important deciding factor in whether you succeed or fail in Splatoon Raiders. You can't make the problem easier or harder in any single way more than by causing the player to need to spend more time to do enough damage. The strongest builds are mostly optimized around damage, and any utility that doesn't directly do damage is for streamlining the process so the player can spend time doing damage instead of worrying about other things. Since it's such a central question of the build, we're going to spend this whole video on figuring out how to do enough damage with your build. Through most of the game, you can survive on just shooting your main weapon. From the very first mission where they put a Splattershot Junior in your hand all the way to the final boss, you were receiving weapon drops that were probably adequate to allow you to beat levels without having to so much as spend a Spiralite shard to upgrade them. Bottomless was the first time I really felt moved to level up my weapon, and it made the biggest difference in my capability to progress while it was still possible. It might also be that a different kind of main weapon could give you a boost in DPS. Taro came out with a video where he tested every Primo 5-star weapon and took down its DPS in all its different firing modes. Now mind you, it doesn't necessarily reflect how the weapon will work in practice. Rail Splatana's DPS is huge with repeated vertical hits and melee range, but your ink tank also runs out in less than 3 seconds, so the number's a little deceptive. Still, I'll take data that I know the flaw in over data I don't any day of the week. At a certain point, the ability to upgrade a weapon's damage does cap. A level 50 plus 50 weapon, or level 100 if you prefer, is the end of the line for that progression. Leveling up the player character past a certain point gives you a very funny flat bonus of plus 2 damage per level. Needless to say, enemy HP scales up faster than your damage does at that point, so you'll need to get more creative. As we discussed in part 1, the way to augment your damage depends on how your weapon works. The strongest option, based on what's currently available in the game, is a weapon with very high single damage shots that pierce or splash onto multiple enemies. But that depends largely on Icebreaker, which is wasted on a rapid-fire weapon. If a rapid-fire weapon is what you want to build around, you'll need much different options. And fortunately, there certainly are some available. I'll be covering a lot of relics and weapon powers here, but I won't be able to cover every single one of them in this video. If you've got a "what about this one?" question, I'll end up getting to it in a future video, where I go through each one individually to cover its use cases. Damage in Splatoon Raiders seems really straightforward. The weapon tells you what number it does, and then as long as you shoot without modifiers on the damage, it does that number. You put on a single bonus, and see that that bonus affects the damage exactly the way you think it will. You reverse engineer that Ferment is a 1.2x multiplier, and you feel all smart about yourself. But then you try stacking different bonuses, and it suddenly makes a lot less sense. Here's an example. At my level, this weapon does a base damage of 19,434. If you ferment an enemy, which adds 20% or does 1.2x damage, it now does 23,320. All set also increases your damage by 20% when you have full HP. Slap that on, you get the same number, 23,320. But when you stack either of these two with Damage Surge, it gets weird. Damage Surge, which I have on my dash bomb, gives me plus 100% damage, or times 2. So now we have our base damage of 19,434, times 1.2 for Ferment, times 2 for Damage Surge, which we would expect gives us 46,641. That it does. If we swap out Fermentation for All Set, though, which we've established is also a 20% increase, it's 42,755. What gives? We've established the multipliers are the same. We've established that you get the same damage numbers when you apply All Set and Fermentation in isolation. Why does Ferment do more damage than All Set when, and only when, you stack them with Damage Surge? This was the dilemma I got hung up on when I was testing and trying to reverse engineer it myself. But thankfully, Shiromaishi and Zakwa found the missing variable. Damage Surge and All Set are both indicated next to each other in the UI on the bottom left, while Fermentation isn't. Shiromaishi and Zakwa call these skills that are shown in the bottom left active skills. Also included are Risky Reward and the power tank's damage up relic. Fermentation, or long range, or concentrated attack, or icebreaker don't show up in the lower left, so those are considered passive skills. Passive skills scale multiplicatively, like you'd think they would. Fermentation just multiplies whatever you've got by 1.2 and calls it a day. Bonuses from active skills, though, get their percentage added to all the other active skills, and then the single number that results from that addition is the multiplier that gets applied. To go back to our example, Damage Surge is an active skill, but Ferment is a passive one. Since there's only one active skill, you just add the 100% or multiply by 2, and then the Ferment, the passive skill, adds another 20% or multiplies by 1.2. We get the number we expect. But when you combine All Set with Damage Surge instead, you now have 2 active skills, so they're going to be added to each other instead of multiplied. Multiplying the passive skills from earlier, 2 times 1.2 is 2.4. So you're multiplying by 2.4 or you're adding 140%. But adding the active skills, you add 100% to 20%, and that gives you 120%. So you're only multiplying by 2.2. 19,434 times 2.2 gives us the damage number that we were seeing. This isn't to say that active skills are worthless, especially Damage Surge. Damage Surge is an extremely powerful multiplier that you should always take if it's offered to you. But when you're weighing the value of different options, realize that as soon as you have one other active skill, something like All Set, which claims to give a 20% increase, is actually doing less for you than most passive skills, even if the numbers are supposedly smaller. Damage Surge plus the power tank's damage up relic, another active skill that says it increases weapon damage by 40%, combines to add 140%, a 2.4x multiplier. But Damage Surge plus Close Combat, a passive skill which fully stacked is only listed as a 32% increase, or a 1.32x multiplier, still gives you a lot more damage, because 2 times 1.32 gives you a 2.64x multiplier. Certainly take the Damage Surge, but keep in mind that you now have an active skill covered. So now you're probably going to get better stacking from passives instead of actives. Again, that's just the math. Always consider also how frequently you'll actually be triggering these conditions in-game. If all that made your head spin a little, the good thing for you is that there's a calculator for a lot of this. Shiromaishi and Zakwa have put together a spreadsheet with drop-downs and formulas so you can input the damage value of your main weapon and then the different relics and weapon powers you have equipped, and it'll do all the math for you. When you click the link, it'll prompt you to make a copy of the spreadsheet, which is what you should do, because otherwise you'll be looking at a single spreadsheet that anyone can mess with while you're trying to use it yourself. Before I realized what had happened, I myself messed with someone else's damage calculation one of the times I used it. Just get your own copy and go from there. If you've got a specific build in mind, but you're trying to figure out what the best 4th or 5th relic slots would be, popping the build into the calculator is a great way to do it. Just make sure to also consider how realistic it is for you to trigger the effects you're including. One thing that's not listed on the damage calculator is Mega Power Egg Explosion, which is a really interesting case that I'm not fully decided on right now. It's being used by the players pushing the bottomless world record, which speaks highly of it, though I think it's got a very small niche that just happens to align with the build the record holders are using. Testing it is difficult because it happens so fast that studying it often requires recording and then watching the footage back frame by frame. I'm sure we'll figure out more about this with time, but I'll give my rundown of what we know about it in the relics video. Part of this, to be honest, is stalling for more time to be able to test it. Shiromaishi and Zakwa are currently working on getting a deeper understanding of the kind of damage scaling that occurs when a player levels up, and how it's determined between player level and mission level. This affects things like the increases to main weapon damage that happen on level up, Scorch damage, Mega Power Egg Explosion tick damage, and the damage from the auras of a tank activation, and will also unlock a better understanding of gadget damage. The reason I haven't focused on gadgets much at all in this video is that as HP bars scale up, gadget damage doesn't keep pace as well as main damage does. This is why the world record build is optimized more around augmenting main weapon damage than it is about using gadgets that hit hard with their own damage numbers. For example, Blast Boot and Jump Bomb seem pretty unassuming, but they let you freeze enemies to set up for Icebreaker. They can refill your ink tank. They let you move around the map faster. One keeps you airborne so you're safe. They both buff the main weapon's damage and reduce its downtime. There are things you'd have to spend time doing, like painting for movement, moving around a lesser to get a shot lined up, refilling your ink tank, that you don't have to do with these gadgets. So they end up helping the player do more damage than any of them will ever do by themselves. Sure, these gadgets do damage themselves, but the damage isn't even the third strongest thing about them. Utility and setting up main weapon damage are really what you want out of your gadgets, more than gadget damage. Something like Bomb Loons or Booyah can be very strong for a lot of the game, even a good ways into Bottomless Buffet. But then so is everything else. It's only once the pressure of enemy health bars creeping up starts being felt that there's really much of a distinction to make between any of the gadgets. All of them can and have been played hundreds of floors deep, so getting deeper into Bottomless and seeing which ones keep working is one of the only real ways you could rank them against each other. Anyway, these gadgets that are focused on doing their own damage rather than boosting the player's main weapon damage or uptime will eventually get outscaled by the main weapon damage, so it's hard to make a good argument for them in deep Bottomless. I'm sure there's a meta developing for speedruns, which looks different from all of this, but like we went over in the first video, we're setting our sights on clearing floors of Bottomless, so that's what this guide is about. If your goal is to push into Bottomless with something off-meta, the question becomes first, what are you changing? And second, what does that change about your build? For example, if you're running a rapid-fire weapon, Icebreaker will be useless now. What makes the most sense to replace it with? Does your weapon have the range to use long range, or do you need to swap that out? Are you using Torque-Screw or Splatolites or Tether Whale? If not, Concentrated Attack is suddenly on the table as a potential option, because it won't get interrupted by AoE damaging other targets by mistake. It's an especially strong option on Brellas, since Brellas hit multiple pellets per shot, and each one of them procs Concentrated Attack. It's also a passive skill, so it'll scale better than active skills do. Essentially, look at all the relics and weapon powers that increase damage and think, can my build activate those? And then think, of the ones my build can activate, which ones give me the most value for their slot? It might take a little testing or a little work with the damage calculator, but it should be something you can narrow down in a fairly short amount of time. Once you put a build together, assess what changes you need to make to your playstyle to get all the parts of it to activate. Do you need to cycle your gadgets continuously to trigger damage surges? Do you need to stay at a certain range from your targets? Do you need to keep yourself at max HP? Or are you trying to take more risks and deliberately put yourself in the danger state? Are you somewhere in between? Do you need to focus your shots on a single target, or is the build dependent on piercing or AoE damage? What do you need to do to refill your ink tank? One last order of business is deciding on a Showstopper. Given how infrequently you'll actually be able to charge this, it's not really that significant. It can only affect a floor or maybe two, and only for one short burst. My current thinking is that Big Man will get outscaled the hardest, as he takes away your ability to use your main weapon while also inflicting Scorch, the weakest scaling damage type. Don't get me wrong, at earlier levels, he makes a boss's health bar empty like the gas tank of an American pickup truck. But this is Bottomless we're talking about. Given the many options available for increasing survivability, as well as, well, just getting good, I think the panic button will be favored less and less the deeper you go. When I have seen people use it, they'll often cancel it early by jumping off a ledge. They're willing to put themselves back in danger, just in a different location, because the extra DPS you get from the main weapon and gadgets is just too important to give up for very long. Fry and Shiver, though, there's been some testing and iteration. World record holders were running Fry, but I've noticed that they've switched to Shiver, and I think that makes a lot of sense for them. Fry ferments, which is strong of course, and does so over a large area of effect, but Torque-Screw already does that continuously on the meta build. It's possible for Fry to do more damage to a single target than Shiver, but that depends on the enemy being hit by every available hitbox, while Shivers will do a single tick of damage with a high number. The freeze from Shiver is what probably gives her the biggest edge, because freezing a long line of enemies in front of an Icebreaker E-Leader feels like a bigger source of damage. I still think Fry is very powerful, even into deep bottomless, and that she probably makes more sense with some builds. A player named Reset broke into the 900s on Butane Blaster, and they were using Fry. Just pointing it out because that's a new development I wanted to share. Next time, we'll focus a little bit more in and get into the nitty-gritty about relics and weapon powers and very specific decisions like that. See you in the next one.